Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you, Arlene, for setting the tone for our conversation today with that beautiful meditation. Um, as Ben mentioned, my name is Kirstin Vander Giessen-Reitsma, and I'm the head caretaker for whole systems design, another mouthful to go with my mouthful of a name, at GilChrist Retreat Center in Three Rivers, Michigan. We're a partner of the Fetzer Institute. And I'm also on the Retreat Center Collaboration Steering Committee. And I am currently a guest of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, where I live here in Three Rivers, and also of the St. Joseph River watershed. So I'd like to start out this framing for our time together with just a little bit about the Retreat Center collaboration journey on this topic, which in my mind goes back to one of our earliest core values, which is the power of place. And I want to tease that out a little bit. And Justine's going to be helping me out by posting some of the main points of this brief reflection in the chat, which is about the least sophisticated technological way we could do it, but I think it'll work. So first of all, I think one of the things that I and we have been learning through this process is that the power of place is not just about what happens on the land we tend within our retreat center's lifetime, but also everything that has ever happened here and everything that will happen here. So GilChrist Retreat Center just turned 25 years old, but my responsibility as a steward here goes back 2,500, 25,000 years and more, and it leans into the future that much and more. So I'm sitting at a particular point in time, but my work here in this point in time is about the past and the future as much as it's about the present. The next idea that's been coming to me as I learn from this process is that the power of place is not just about our individual center, but also our network of centers. So if there are 2,000 plus centers and growing in our network and in the world, what is our capacity to work together to impact things like climate change or land reparations? So I think sometimes we can feel very isolated and helpless in our individual context. But one of the values, I think, of this network is that it helps us see what's possible when we come together and work as a collaborative, and increases our capacity to really have an impact on these things that can feel very overwhelming to us as individuals. Next, the power of place is not just about the impact the land has on humans, but also on all living beings who call these places home. And that feels a little bit self-evident to say, and yet I also find that in the daily grind of running a nonprofit organization and tending to the needs of our human guests, or the interests of our boards of directors, or whatever the case may be, I think it's easy to become sort of anthropocentric in our understanding of what our responsibility is. So I just wanted to emphasize the not just the presently living beings that call the places home that we tend, from the soil microbes to the squirrels to the songbirds, but also the ancestors and future generations. And finally, the power of place is not just about the impact the land has on all beings, but also the ways that patterns of power and privilege impact our systems of ownership and authority. So playing around with that notion, the power of place, what we tend to go to when we hear that is the impact that the place has on us. But there's also that other aspect of power present in that value, that we recognize that that we're steeped in a legacy of private land ownership that is tied to wealth, gender, and race status throughout history. And reimagining these systems on the ground is really going to take collective energy and strategy. So the power of place is a huge gift and a huge responsibility, which I think many of us know and feel physically. And yet also so many of our retreat centers are at risk, or feel like we're in a time of scarcity or fragility. And even if we're not in that place of fragility, we might be maintaining systems of ownership and authority that don't really align with our deepest values, and we don't know where to start. So I think that is, for me, that is the heart of this conversation, not just for our network, but for me personally. So I'd like to share just a little bit of my story and where I am to set up, we'll go into small groups shortly, groups of 4 for just 10 minutes, because I think this conversation and this inquiry has to be grounded in our particular circumstances, because we're all in such different places, in such different systems of authority and accountability that however we choose to move forward in terms of the future of our land really has to relate to where we are geographically, where we are institutionally, all of those things. So as far as my story, if I combine my work at the retreat center and my life as a private citizen, including my volunteering, I steward over 73 acres of land in the Three Rivers area, spread across 6 different parcels of property. So the questions that we're asking today and the stories that we're hearing today, they have specific places to land for me. And each of those places is very different from one another. But the majority of that land is owned by nonprofit corporations, which nonprofit corporations are collectively managed, but there's a broad range of types of management for those organizations, as you all well know. In my case, most of the people who have authority in those organizations are white people. And the structure is such that those groups of people could choose tomorrow to sell land for the resources that land represents. So even if the organization itself is fairly stable, there's still fragility in that notion that a very small group of people or even a single individual could make a choice tomorrow to use that land as commodity in order to sustain the operations of the organization. For myself, when I do offer a land acknowledgement for those spaces, I really, at this point in my life, do that in a spirit of confession, because I know that I cannot point to a robust set of specific practices that uphold what I would see as the ideal relationship that should be represented by that land acknowledgement. So I am very much personally in a space of inquiry in this. I am not coming to it as an expert. I have way more questions than answers. I'm interested in alternative models of stewardship that can preserve wild spaces in perpetuity, but also that can facilitate structured, accountable transfer of authority for these lands, both now and in the future. And I'm really interested in learning more about land trusts, both for environmental conservation and for social reparations. So I am really excited to hear from the folks who are going to be sharing later in our session today, to hear how they and their organizations have worked out these values in very specific, concrete ways. Because I'm really leaning into that myself. And I think many of us who are coming here as folks who are in retreat center contexts, we understand inherently that feeling of connection to the land But we may not always know where to go with that on a practical level, especially as we expand our awareness of the impacts of climate change and the systems of power and privilege that influence the way we hold land in our organizations and in our private lives. So I'm really thankful for all of the folks who have agreed to share today. But I'd like to continue at the moment before we hear from that group of people to ground the conversation in our unique contexts that we each bring. So Ben is going to send us into small groups of 4 for 10 minutes. So that's about 2.5 minutes for each person. And I invite you to just introduce yourself and your center briefly. And then the question to focus on for reflection and this brief conversation is, when you think about the future of the land you steward, what are the biggest obstacles or questions that you face? So what are the knots, right? What are the lines of inquiry? What are the places that feel like dead ends at the moment? What are the ways in which even dreaming about this feel impossible? Think about that, even write those things down on paper. And then I invite you, as we head into the story sharing, to listen for some of the ways that space is opening up that might not have felt like it was there before, or a question is coming to you that you'd really like a trail that you'd like to follow. And with that, I think we are ready to go into small groups. Welcome back, folks. Okay, it looks like everybody's popped back in. Thank you all for sharing parts of your story with each other. I would invite you, if you would like, in the chat to post one of your most highly present questions or obstacles that you felt coming out of that conversation. And we'll be collecting those as ideas and inspiration for future conversation on this topic. We know that we won't have enough space in our 90 minutes today to do everything we could possibly do with this, because it's so extensive, so complicated, so rich. So please post those things in the chat to share with the group and share with our steering committee. And for further inspiration, we're going to head into the next portion of our time together, facilitated by Oren, to hear some stories about what some specific centers are working on.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirstin. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. And thank you for that introduction. And I know a lot of questions are probably bubbling up as we're exploring our relationship to the legacies of our land. What we had hoped to do now is to use a few of our community members to tell the story of what they have done. And there are so many different ways in how retreat centers relate to land. Commonweal is actually situated in a national park, Point Reyes National Seashore. So we have very limited capacity to have any kind of formal relationship with the land, and we are dependent on our lease, and we got a new landlord a few months ago. So we're grateful for our new landlord who is supportive of the Park Service. But that's one example how we know that the land that Commonweal is on is protected, at least from an environmental perspective, for a very long time. I can't talk to PRS because they're so overwhelmed. So what we're going to do is we have 5 people with us who are going to be sharing their specific stories of how they hold their land. I think each one of them could probably tell a story that we would have questions and answers that would last for a whole hour. But today what we're hoping to do is to get our thoughts going. And then as questions come up, please put them in the chat and we will then share it with our panelists. We might create alternative forums. So part of our community calls, or maybe a special series about land legacies and relationships to land and questions that come up around land, from the spiritual to the legal. So let's see how the session goes. Please keep the questions going. I'm not sure we'll be able to address all of them. So what we'll do is we're going to dive in, and we ask each of our community members who's going to be sharing to give the story of the land. They're going to introduce who they are and tell us what have been some of their thoughts and their explorations, and actually, in some cases, what are the structures that they have created. And we're going to start with Liz Walz. She's the executive director of the Genesis Spiritual Center in Massachusetts. Liz.
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. I'm sharing my screen. First of all, thank you all who are helping hold this space. This is just beautiful. So Genesis Spiritual Life and Conference Center is located in Westfield, Massachusetts, and Providence Arboretum comprises the grounds. It's 19.5 acres. The indigenous people were the Roanoke tribe and the Pecumtuck, and it was the Pecumtuck land. The land is now understood as part of the Westfield River watershed, and the Westfield River drains into the Connecticut, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean, where it connects with all the people of the world. The longing that birthed Providence Arboretum emerged from more than 90 years of ministry by the Sisters of Providence of Holyoke, who developed relationship with the trees over decades and cultivated a desire to inspire people and protect the trees. So breathe just a moment and relax, and allow this outer landscape to reflect something in your inner landscape. If you were in this landscape, where would you be? arbnet.org is the portal to a network of tree people and toolkits for learning more about trees and becoming tree enthusiasts. The intention is to educate and inspire, but I was aware when Kirstin was speaking just now that this is not legally binding, and so that was a great flag for me. But arbnet.org is your mechanism if you want to pursue creating an arboretum. And just notice where your eye is drawn and what happens as you gaze. To establish an arboretum, you need 5 things. A level 1 arboretum is the lowest amount of rigor. You need a plan, which is a document that describes your audience, the collection, and the provisions for stewardship. You need a governance group that will sign some of the legal documents. You need a collection of at least 25 different species that are in good shape, and that means not diseased or damaged. You need some sort of staff or volunteer contingent, and that can, for us, it's embedded in our existing staff. And to maintain status as an arboretum, you need at least 1 public dimension per year. So for us, that's Earth Day or Arbor Day. I mean, for retreat centers, I think that's a pretty easy bar. Some of the happy consequences of becoming an arboretum are that you can bring an educational component about the ecology as a whole into your local community. It's an education and enculturation opportunity for your staff and volunteers. It's a great story to tell guests and local press, and to establish community outreach and bridge to the climate justice conversation and other eco-spiritual, eco-justice conversations. An arboretum will bring you into relationship with new kindreds that you might not have otherwise connected with, and it's an opportunity for fundraising. This is our little garden and our chicken condo. In the process of creating your statement, you'll need to articulate a vision and a mission. This is an opportunity to establish the values that are guiding what you're doing. So our vision is to invite all who come to experience the trees individually and collectively as a living icon, a visible reflection of the invisible. Our mission is to raise awareness of the interconnectedness of all creation, infused with the divine energy that makes us all one. And great little photos as these, and I'm sure you all have your collections too. We use this one for the tag, "Come Grow With Us." And that's what I've got.
Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
So here's an example of the Genesis Spiritual Center that was able to designate or create a designation as an arboretum, which provides a different relationship with the land that they're on. Not sure about the legal status of it, but does create a different relationship to the land. Thank you. Nanci Lee is the executive director of the Tatamagouche Center in Nova Scotia, which is in Canada for those Americans here who need to, anyway. Nanci, are you with us?
I am. Hi, everyone.
There you are. Hi, Nanci. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Nanci Lee. Kirstin, I like your job title. I want caretaker going forward. But I'm calling in from beautiful, unceded, unsurrendered Mi'kma'ki, which is Mi'kmaq territory. And I'm here on behalf of Tatamagouche Center, which is a 15-acre justice-oriented learning and retreat center. I believe we also have Tionda Kane and Megan Miller here, so invite them to jump in too. I'm going to also share a screen and share some photos. If I can do that. Can everyone see that? Yes. So Tatamagouche, the Mi'kmaq term, it's actually a Mi'kmaq term, Tatamagouche, which means where the sandbar meets the river. And this is just such a beautiful, this is right in front of our property, abutting the property where the French and Wa rivers meet. And we are, the Tatamagouche Center is owned by the United Church of Canada. So speaking of ownership, I would like to just call on my ancestors as well as the ancestors and elders that have held the land at Tatamagouche Center. And I want to take you back, Jim and Margaret Drescher, who you're going to hear from, inspired this, but I want to take you back over 3,000 years ago when the center was a gathering space for the Mi'kmaq. So what you would have seen is we still have traces, sumac trees, high bush cranberry, hawthorn, brambles protecting crops. They would have fished in the rivers here, and the fish bones would be sweetening the soil. So in 1725, the British Crown started signing treaties with the First Nations in our areas of the Maritimes, as well as northeastern US. Importantly, these were not ceding land and territory. They were the basis for peace and friendship, for relationships nation to nation. So in the spirit of that, Tatamagouche Center began, we were founded in the mid-50s, but we began our peace and friendship work with Indigenous communities around the 80s. So Indigenous elders actually began this initiative by calling out the church for their role in colonization. And the United Church issued a formal apology in the 80s, but it took another decade before they, I won't get into all the details, but it took a solid decade to fully apologize for their role in forcibly taking children from their homes into residential schools. So just apology as practice. So what does that mean today? Over the years, let me tell you a little bit about the structure. It really is a partnership. We don't consider it a project or a program. It's a partnership between Indigenous communities across the Maritimes, Mi'kmaq, Wolfsack, Penobscot and Passamaquoddy even. The structure that holds it is a committee of Indigenous elders and settlers. And we regularly hold peace and friendship gatherings. So over the years, there's been a lot of allied support around treaty rights and awareness, around water and land defense and protection. And that's still really an important part of our work. In fact, we also do support land and human rights protection in Guatemala. So the advocacy part is still very important to us, but as important is the breaking bread together, the friendship, the ceremony, just how we're more embodied, less divisive in ceremony. So this has been taking place over decades, so lasting friendships and also mistakes and harm, so hurting one another, rebuilding and repairing, and that work continues. Ownership of that harm is a really important part of our journey, but also the magic of what's possible when we come together around sacred fire, when we come together. So for us, land and water, it's sacred space, as I said. It's also healer and teacher. And again, practically, what does that mean in our programs? I talked about land as sacred space. This year, we hope when we can gather together that we're going to have a big peace and friendship gathering, a community meal, very light on learning and long on connections and just being together, you know. Land as healer. This past year, as you all know, the racial violence, the grief, we were able to hold some programs, but we also saw and heard that what people really needed was rest, healing. And so we offered the center as an invitation to rest for Black and Indigenous elders and activists. And we have huge demand for that to continue. We are going to continue those programs. And finally, land as teacher. So not just land-based learning, and we have some of that where Indigenous youth are sharing trapping and skinning skills with others, Indigenous and settler youth, but how land as a teacher helps us take that longer, slower view, how we actually move in the world. And so practically speaking, an example, we may be walking away from a funder who we've had some conversation. It's ironically the funder who funded land-based learning for Indigenous youth. We've had some conversations. They wanted to have a dialogue with us about the program. And we had to have conversations with them about what dialogue really means, if it's truly going to be meaningful. Because what they had sent us was a list of 65 questions, actually. And so talking about what it means to be in relation and what needs to be rethought or reconsidered to do that well, we take a lot from our elders. So we are now at the center in a period of rest along the same lines and reflection about what this time is asking, the real need to pause. And I'm going to leave you with a question from one of our board members, with his permission, Mi'kmaq board member, Charlie Sark. And he said, our collective intergenerational transmission of knowledge, truth, and compassion appears to wane at pace. How do we slow and eventually reverse this pace? So I will leave you there.
Thank you, Nanci. Thank you for that question. And if you could put that question in the chat, that would be great so we can hold it with us.
I will.
Our next guest can actually not be here in person, Krystyna Jurzykowski. She is the former owner of High Hope Retreat Center, which is in Texas, if I'm not mistaken. It's in between the corridor of, I think between Austin and Dallas, right next to a very large Natural Wildlife Reserve. She's also very involved with the Yggdrasil Foundation, and we asked Krystyna to share some of her thoughts through video.
I was brought to Texas, a long, long story, 33 years ago, on behalf of endangered species, a place next door called Fossil Rim Wildlife Center. And High Hope, where I live, was created as a buffer against development for that wildlife preserve. And then in the early 2000s became a place of retreat and a place for retreat, not only protecting the habitat for native species, also creating opportunities for people to connect to nature so that ultimately they can connect to their own and begin to make decisions based on interdependent connection. And so High Hope has taught me over these 33 years how to connect with other than human relationships. And I've been guided to acknowledge that the land is a partner and all the species on these lands are partnership to our own dreams and our own mission. And so over time, we have more and more turned the implicit nature of relationship into an explicit one. And combining Fossil Rim, that's about 2,000 acres, and High Hope, about 900 acres. In these 33 years, there is development pressure coming from all sides. We live between Austin and Dallas-Fort Worth, and those cities are coming both ways. And so these two islands have to serve, and our decisions today have to be for the next generations, not just for ourselves, which has led to this relationship and collaboration with Yggdrasil Land Foundation, a Steiner-based land foundation that's based on really exploring the spiritual nature of connection, not only with all the members of the visible community, and also with the essence, the sense that we have that there are many other participants and stakeholders. And so we have followed really since the 90s. I have a deep association with RSF Social Finance, the Biodynamic Association of America, and other Steiner-based organizations. This land foundation is intent on separating the cultural and the economic philosophy that land is an economic asset and valued for an economic gain. And really, when we set that aside, and when High Hope legally is in Yggdrasil's hands, the value of High Hope on their balance sheet will be zero. And that way, they, all the elements, visible and invisible, of High Hope will be valued for their innate collaboration and on behalf of something so much greater than even the activities that are part of our program. So we have some wonderful tools available to us as conservation easements. What I find fascinating with Yggdrasil and the people who lead that organization is that they're looking to go even further. And conservation easements are ultimately mandated through the IRS and federal systems and could change at any time. And therefore, land ownership, and I put that in quotation marks, we yet to have a word. The closest one we have is stewardship. And so we've combined owner, steward, and operating steward as new references to the different roles and functions in the protection of a landscape and land. And for High Hope, those arrangements are being articulated, co-articulated through covenants of promise that have a legal nature and an ethical, moral, and principle nature that then get translated into guidelines for operation.
Thank you. That was Krystyna Jurzykowski, the former owner of the High Hope Retreat Center in Texas, working with Yggdrasil Foundation, and their strategy has been to, it's terrible to kind of paraphrase it this way, but remove the objectification of land by nullifying the value so it's not just based on its economic value. And in that case, they actually then can rent it back to the retreat center, the High Hope Retreat Center. The business itself can then rent from the land trust. Our next guest is Margaret Drescher. She's the owner of Windhorse Farms in Nova Scotia. I think she's Nanci's neighbor, if I'm not mistaken. Margaret.
Hi. Yes, I am Nanci's neighbor, and even closer is my husband, who is I think on the screen there. Hopefully Jim will wave and say hello to everyone. My name is Margaret Drescher, and I, with my husband, dear friend of 50 years, are the co-directors of Windhorse Farm. That is here in Nova Scotia, which is actually called Mi'kma'ki, and it is in Canada. This has been our family farm. We purchased it 31 years ago to take it off the marketplace and raised our family here. We have 5 children, and we have been here for 31 years. And through that time of our stewardship, it has become a retreat center because people were attracted to this place and wanted to be here on the land, and they wanted to learn from the land. And that is what we have been doing throughout our stewardship. We would like to welcome you from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq. They are the Indigenous people of Mi'kma'ki, which is now called Nova Scotia, Canada. But going back to the name Mi'kma'ki, that's what most people now are calling it here in Nova Scotia. And this time of year, the Mi'kmaq would have gathered on this land that Nanci so beautifully described what it would look like. And here we're on a large lake where they would have fished for eels and various other fishes. They would have been in the river, in the fields, harvesting medicine, beavers, muskrat, deer, moose, mostly moose, and living in ceremony, living in community here. They have been gathering here in this province for over 13,000 years. And it is with deep gratitude we honor them and their legacy. We are also in gratitude to the Retreat Center collaboration. It's a fantastic opportunity that you have hosted us so that we can deeply reflect on sort of why we're here and what we have been doing and what we will be doing. Your opening poem in speaking to the threads that braid together is in the Windhorse story. And I brought a braid here which is from a Mi'kmaq elder, and it's a sweetgrass, which maybe you can smell it. it's pungent and delightful and comes from the lakes here. So we're braiding together our original heritage, which is the Mi'kmaq people themselves. We are braiding into this the Wenzel family, who were one of those families that Nanci talked about, one of the colonizers, a German family that came here in 1840. And they were given a land grant, and they are woven into this braid, as well as the Drescher family, who have been here for 31 years in stewardship. Windhorse is a sacred place. It's 300 acres of mostly old growth forest, pristine forest. And that is because the Wenzel family took such great care of it. They harvested very selectively, and it's been cared for beautifully. We had the good fortune of coming after the Wenzels, who had no heirs, and this was about to be clear cut. And people said, you have to see it before that happens, because you won't see forests like this in Nova Scotia. It's like 1% of 1% of the forest land in Nova Scotia. So they said, you must come. And when we left, we didn't have a dime, but we said, we cannot leave this. So I would say our first stewardship action has been in protection. We have taken Windhorse Farm off of the marketplace in order to take it off the marketplace forever and return it to the rightful stewards, the original stewards, the Mi'kmaq. And we're in the process of doing that right now. We came here in 1990. We built a variety of facilities to host up to 40, 50 people. We have 7 off-grid small cabins for personal retreats. And we've been inspired personally by the Shambhala Buddhist principles of co-creating a good human society. And that's based on the appreciation of the inherent decency, health, and wholeness of all beings. So that's part of our stewardship principle, is caring for all beings on this land, all that come here, and recognizing who they are at their essence. So we have hosted thousands of people here in individual and collective retreats, internships, as a learning center and a program venue. So the question was asked of us, what has your longing been motivated by? Longing for our stewardship. And I would say to protect the land through buying the land, to offer a protected place and space for others to come and explore, learn, teach, play, and deepen themselves. The implementation of ecological principles, sharing them with others and instilling as our legacy work. And to holding to our original purpose of removing the land from the marketplace and returning it to the original stewards. From the first moment, that was our purpose when we came here and saw this place. We remember Chief Seattle's words, which were, how can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. So that has been our original inspiration of being here. And this month, we are transitioning from Windhorse Retreat Center to Ulnooweg, which is a Mi'kmaq word meaning to make indigenous, a healing and learning center. We are selling the actual business of Windhorse Farm, basically to pay off the mortgage and give us a little something to live on for the rest of our lives. And this Mi'kmaq development group has a charity that is funded by the private sector, foundation, and government money, both provincial and federal, in order to support them to be able to buy part of Windhorse. But the majority of Windhorse Farm will be given back. It's called land back. We are returning the land back to the Mi'kmaq people for no financial consideration. the deed for the land will be transferred to the Ulnooweg charity. And Windhorse will become a place of healing, education, and medicine for the original stewards that were here. This was made easier. I was saying in my little breakout group, it's easier for us because it's just Jim and I who are in conversation saying, what shall we do? And because it's a family business, family owned, we are able to come to decisions quite easily in our process. And both Jim and I have had a shared intention throughout the 30 years that we've been here. And now we have been in a very direct and continuous relationship with the Mi'kmaq people. Relationship has been the most important part of our process, being in relationship with them, meaning we have been in circle for 3 years in conversation with the Mi'kmaq, talking about what are your needs, and they asking us what are our needs, and meeting them. So with this sweet grass, I offer it back to the center of the circle, and thank you for listening to this small story.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for that wonderful story and about what a unique way to preserve the land by transferring. Ownership is kind of a weird concept that we're hearing from you and from Krystyna, returning the land to the indigenous community and then selling the business itself. Thank you. Our last guest here is Jakir Manela. He's the CEO of the Pearlstone Center and Jewish Outdoor Food and Farming Environmental Education, Jaffe, which is based in Maryland. Jakir.
Thank you so much, Oren. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everyone. I feel really humbled to be part of this group. Really powerful words being shared. I hope I can offer something. So Pearlstone is a retreat center and Jewish outdoor education campus. We're 180 acres. We're located just outside of Baltimore on Susquehannock and Piscataway land. We've done research into the history of our land, never found conclusively, but we do believe there was enslavement practiced on the land that we now inhabit and is owned legally, stewarded by the Associated Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore. Jewish Federation system is across the country, many strong communities, and Baltimore is actually one of the strongest. And this format of a retreat center and outdoor education center was not really what they necessarily imagined when they first acquired the land 50 plus years ago to be a day camp. But it has grown and evolved significantly to the point where we now impact over 20,000 people a year from all walks of life, certainly across the Jewish world and many other faith groups and secular groups. It's really a beautiful experience. We have a certified organic farm. We practice ecosystem restoration in a variety of ways. And we're actually just coming down off the mountain the last couple of days of the holiday of Shavuot in the Jewish calendar, which is the anniversary of Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And the reason I share that is that one of the longings and foundational understandings for us is this quote from the book of Isaiah, that my house shall be a house of prayer for all peoples. And we don't say that to say that everyone who comes into our space needs to be God-centric or needs to be prayer-centric, but that in the broadest sense of how we think about spiritual practice, that this can be a space where all are welcome and can all find that meaning. And our approach to this, to our stewardship is really we hope, as a catalyst for culture change spiritually, particularly targeting the Jewish community, but really everyone that comes through our doors, to try to transmute and transform our understanding of our religious heritage and tradition, to understand our obligations as stewards of the earth, stewards of land, stewards of justice and sustainability, so that culture change maybe begins spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and is enacted ecologically and socially. And there are unique actually not so unique to the Jewish experience, but there are aspects of Jewish history around exile from land, not having legal, not being allowed to have access to land for hundreds of years, that this access has motivated us to say, well, what does that mean? What is a cultural expression of our tradition on land? There are actually specific traditions around gratitude, around blessings, around food justice and leaving the corners of the field and gleanings, around integrity balanced with diversity, around how we mix different crops and species together or not, keep them separate. Traditions around how we think about sacred, sustainable rhythms of rest, the Sabbath, but also on an annual basis, the 7th month is a whole month full of holidays and rest and celebration. On the sabbatical year cycle, every 7th year is the sabbatical year where we let the land rest. We forgive debts. And in the Jewish calendar, the sabbatical year actually begins this fall. We've continued to track that, and the sabbatical year starts right after Labor Day this year. And then on an even broader scale, the 7 cycles of 7 years, the Jubilee year. What do those look like, and how do we actually think about our space as a Sabbath in place? That even if you come on a Tuesday, you have a Sabbath experience, and how do we give that to people? And I think the challenge to the question earlier, obstacles and questions we face, we are operating, a big facility and food service and hospitality operations. There are costs there. We are trying to balance, financially. How do we enact justice and equity and access? We've begun working with many city schools. We've begun a partnership with the Baltimore American Indian Center. We've begun a partnership with the Black Yield Institute, a really powerful organization leading Black food sovereignty and food apartheid work in Baltimore City. How much can we center that work, given all the stakeholders and constituents and the balancing of goals that so many folks come to us with? And so where we've landed is that we're really trying to build it into the structure of the organization, the DNA itself, in governance, in our board. We've been working with a DEI consultant and revising our bylaws, looking at our board member description so that it's really built in from the ground up. This is the beginning of a journey. So in some ways, this is maybe a sign of little progress, but for us, it's a step. So I want to transparently share, we've just invited, the first member of our board who is not Jewish. And that's a big step for our board to take that step and really, and it's been beautiful and successful and powerful. And so I guess I would just close by saying, again, coming down off the mountain of the holiday, really trying to reframe what our cultural inheritance is, that our house should be a house of prayer for all peoples, and that we structurally build that in to who we are, what it looks like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And that it's there for all new staff, all board members, all constituents to see in writing. So it's not only, dependent on who shows up and who you're talking to, but it's fundamentally part of how we define ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakir. So looking at the governance and the relationship, the governance of the organization, the relationship to the land as a way to look at the stewardship and using stories and traditions from the Jewish tradition and others to make it a welcoming space for all communities. Thank you. So we've heard now from five different ways on how retreat centers have looked at their relationship to the legacy of their land. And I have to say, it's been amazing to see how all the different ways and how we can develop that relationship. And then what we'd like to do now is we're going to break out into smaller groups. Each one of our speakers will be in a different group, not necessarily to talk about their experience, but just an opportunity for all of us to share about the learnings, to ask questions of each other, to reflect on it. If there's a need for additional sources, please email us so that we can know, because we're going to be collecting all the questions either for the speakers or questions for the community at large, so that we can create a body of knowledge for retreat centers as we are diving into this questions of the legacy of our land. So Ben will be transitioning us into the breakout rooms. We'll have only about 10 minutes, which I know is not enough. So really, let's take the opportunity to quickly introduce ourselves and ask ourselves the question of what is the future opportunity for my center? What do we hope to do for future generations? Which of these instruments or strategies might work for us? So with that, we'll take 10 minutes and then we'll come back here and close together.
All right, I'll send you into groups now.
Where is everybody, Ben?
Yeah, I said, please come back. And they said, nah.
Lots of good conversations. I mean, this segment was just so rich.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm so appreciative.
This one had a lot of inertia going into it as well. So welcome.
Feels like we can almost do a whole retreat just around Land Legacies. And who knows, maybe that is what we should do. Okay, everybody is back. Thank you, everybody. I hear the conversations were great. We want to make sure that we actually have the opportunity to end that on time, which would be in about 60 seconds. But I didn't want to leave us without the chance. One is if there are questions, ideas, or suggestions, please put them in the chat. Ben, do you have other suggestions about how we can continue as far as resources and conversations?
Yes. So I have also put in the chat 2 different links. One is for our Mighty Network. So if you're there, you can add comments to this session and keep the conversation going. You can also tag specific people that you want to chat to who are in Mighty Network. And then I also have a shared Google Doc. If you're more comfortable there, we've pre-filled it with a bunch of resources that we're excited about, but we'd love to see yours as well. So jump in as an editor and add your resources too.
Thank you. I wanted to thank our speakers that shared some of their stories today. I would ask the speakers, if you're willing, put your email in the chat because I know there are some questions if you don't have to, if you don't want to, but just so that people can get a hold of you. I promise we will continue the conversation around land legacies because I know this is primary for us on many levels and many reasons and in many ways. So I promise the Retreat Center Collaborative will continue this conversation. And so this is just the beginning to be continued. Ben, what is our next session?
Our next session is metaformation. It's going to start in about a half hour. So take a break, get a breather, turn off your screen if you can. And we'll see you back in a half hour to talk about how metaphors can help us understand transformation.
And it's a creative session. So I invite you to bring whatever art form you'd like, markers, paints, clay. We're going to have some time to be creative. And that is in 30 minutes. So our invitation is very simply to go be in commune with nature, whether it's a house plant or outside. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.